Most people think a ruined life happens all at once. The dramatic failure, the phone call that changes everything. But for most of us, the real danger isn't in things that can go wrong. It's the fact that they stay exactly the same for 20 years. This is a deep dive into the cost of comfort and why the reasonable days are the ones that actually steal your life. If you felt the low hum of restlessness, this episode's for you.
Nothing collapsed. There was no phone call that split the day in two, no diagnosis, no deadline, no moment that forced a reckoning. You woke up, you moved through the day, you handled what needed to be handled, and you went to sleep, having done enough. And that is the danger. Because when nothing goes wrong, nothing demands your attention. And when nothing demands your attention, time begins to pass without resistance. Years later, you'll try to understand where things went. You'll not point to a single mistake. There will be no clear failure to examine, no dramatic before and after. There will only be a long stretch of days that felt reasonable while they were happening. You'll not say, "I've ruined my life." You will say, "I thought I had more time." That realization does not arrive loudly. It arrives quietly, often in moments that feel unrelated. Standing in a room where you've stood for years, doing something you've done 100 times, noticing for reasons that you can't explain that it no longer feels the way it used to. Not panic, not urgency, something subtler. A low hum beneath your routines, a pressure you can ignore because it doesn't interrupt anything. You still function, you still meet expectations, you still appear steady. But inside, there's a sense that time is moving faster than your decisions, that the future is approaching whether you like it or not, that the space for change is narrowing, even though nothing is explicitly closing. And the cost compounds. Every year you stay the same, change becomes more expensive. Not financially, philosophically. Every season you repeat, your tolerance for disruption shrinks. Your willingness to start over softens. Your imagination quietly adjusts downward. Nothing forces you, nothing breaks. And that's exactly how people lose decades without realizing it. There's a belief that most people absorb early and rarely examine. If nothing's broken, don't fix it. It sounds responsible. It sounds mature. It sounds like something a sensible adult would say. And it quietly keeps people in place long after the fit is gone. Because that belief teaches you to wait for permission that never arrives. You wait for clarity before you move. You wait for confidence before you decide. You wait for certainty before you risk. And waiting feels productive because it feels careful. You're not reckless. You're not impulsive. You're being thoughtful. At least that's the story. But clarity does not come before movement. Confidence does not arrive before action. Certainty is not a prerequisite for meaningful change. That belief has the order backwards. Here's the reframe, one sentence. Staying the same feels safe, but over time it becomes the most expensive decision you make. If that unsettles you, it should. Because comfort doesn't announce itself as danger. It announces itself as reason. It tells you that now's not the right time. That you should be grateful for what works. That disruption would be irresponsible. And because those statements contain truth, they're persuasive. The problem is that they're not wrong. The problem is that they're incomplete. They never account for accumulation. They don't account for the cost of repetition. They don't account for how many years you can postpone a decision while convincing yourself you're being wise. Comfort doesn't trap you all at once. It trains you slowly. It teaches you to lower the bar for dissatisfaction, to interpret restlessness as immaturity, to confuse stability with alignment. And over time, you stop asking whether this life is chosen. You only ask whether it still works. And that is the quiet lie. I want to describe a moment that looked ordinary from the outside. There was no crisis, no confrontation, no obvious reason for reflection. Just a day that went exactly as planned. I realized I was no longer choosing life. I was maintaining it. There's a difference. Choosing is active, maintaining is defensive. Choosing asks, is this still right? Maintaining asks, how do I keep this from falling apart? And responsibility can quietly replace intention if you're not paying attention. Nothing dramatic was wrong, but nothing new was happening either. I had become very good at explaining why now was not the right time. Not because the reasons were false, because they were endless. And that's when it became clear why staying the same is so costly. It doesn't announce itself as loss, it disguises itself as stability. When you don't move, you don't stay where you are. You narrow. Your imagination narrows. Your tolerance for uncertainty narrows. Your willingness to be inexperienced again narrows. The future stops feeling open. It starts feeling managed. Fear plays a quiet role here. Fear is not always panic. Sometimes fear sounds like patience. Sometimes it sounds like gratitude. Sometimes it sounds like responsibility. It tells you that change would disrupt too many people, that wanting more is ungrateful, that risking comfort is selfish. And because those arguments are socially rewarded, they stick. The danger is not fear itself. The danger is fear that never gets questioned. Over time, the cost does not show up as regret. It shows up as dullness. A sense that life is happening adjacent to you instead of through you, and that you are managing time instead of inhabiting it. And that's the proof. Not a breakdown, not a crisis. A slow realization that I was protecting a structure that was no longer protecting me. This is where the story stops being about me, because the details don't matter. The pattern does. At some point, everyone who changes their life encounters the same question. Am I choosing this? Or am I avoiding discomfort of choosing something else? That question removes excuses. It doesn't ask whether things are good enough. It asks whether they are aligned. Here is the single shift that matters. Stop asking whether change is justified. Start asking whether staying the same is costing you something you can't replace. This is not motivation. It's calibration. Time does not replenish. Energy changes. Windows close quietly. And when you understand that, change stops looking reckless. It starts looking precise. The identity shift is subtle. You stop being someone who waits for certainty. You become someone who moves with awareness. Not impulsive, not careless, deliberate. This tension does not resolve. The temptation to stay comfortable returns in new forms. Sometimes it sounds like rest. Sometimes it sounds like patience. Sometimes it sounds like wisdom earned through restraint. It tells you that you can move later, that there's no urgency, that nothing is actually wrong. And that's convincing, because it's partially true. This is not a one-time decision. It's a practice. You notice the quiet fear, you acknowledge it, you don't let it drive. And still, there will be days when staying feels safer than moving, when maintaining feels safer than choosing. Nothing will break to warn you. Nothing will collapse to force your hand. And that's the danger.
If this has hit a nerve, it's because your imagination is starting to wake up. Change isn't reckless. It's staying in a room that no longer fits you. That's the real risk. I'm documenting this entire journey of calibration, step by deliberate step. If you want to move with me, like the video, subscribe, follow the channel. The light doesn't wait, and neither should we.